Hi folks, it's good to be with you and love to everybody out there. I just want to tackle a Muslim apologist called Ijaz Ahmad. Ijaz Ahmad is an apologist who's done a series of critiques of the Gospels, saying the inscriptions of the Gospels were anonymous, that the Gospels were anonymous and some of the New Testament was anonymous. So I want to just tackle that. My website's jasonburnspreacher.com. You can get me on Facebook and Twitter and Royal Blood Ministries Facebook website and Twitter as well, and YouTube channel. On the basically Ijaz's thesis is that they were anonymous, and then gradually over time the words got bigger. So Matthew was added, the Gospel according to Matthew, and the title got bigger and bigger as time got on. And so his argument is that the Gospels were anonymous. A couple of arguments against Ijaz. Number one is the fact that that Martin Hengel has said there's always been a title of some kind to the Gospels. Okay, we look at all the Gospels; they've always got something concerning who wrote it somewhere in the Sinaiticus Vaticanus. There is Matthew added in the middle of the page, indicating Matthew wrote it. So that's the first point. Now he would say that this was added on later, and the thing to remember is whenever we have a Gospel of Matthew, always the word Matthew is there. All right, always. Now he might quote a parchment of a chapter, right? But that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a clear indication of where a marking would be, that it should be there, and we found that is the case with the Gospels. So he's completely out of touch with scholarship. He's only picking on critical scholarship that tries to pin his point down. So what I'm saying is, early on we've always had an indication of Matthew. Now what he doesn't tell you is we found a library near Pompeii, and we found that early literature had the titles of the writings on the top or at the bottom labelled on. So in the time of Jesus, often the titles would be labelled on at the bottom, at the top, and it would just be Matthew or John, or it would be Josephus or at the top or at the bottom. They weren't too bothered about writing big titles, so long as they just got the name of the author, etc. That's all they were bothered about, and that's exactly the earliest Gospels that we have. That's exactly what it shows. So it's in line with how writing was done in that time. Now the reason why the Gospels then had titles added on later is because from parchment, where labels were put on, things began to be written in books, and when they were written in books, that's why the titles got bigger. So it was the Gospel according to Matthew. So that explains Ijaz's kind of historical revisionism of the Gospels. Next thing I want to notice is it's ridiculous to say that the Gospels were anonymous. It's absolutely ridiculous. The whole manuscript tradition proves that wrong, and the whole I think Gaskell has done a massive inventory of all the Gospels. Martin Hengel did an inventory of the Gospels, and they categorically say that the titles were there even at the beginning. Not the long ones, but an indication that Matthew, Mark, Luke and John wrote those Gospels. That's what the manuscript tradition shows you. But that you can say that because the titles got bigger, that shows that it was anonymous is ridiculous. It misunderstands the nature of the development of literature from the 1st century up into the 9th century. The next thing I want to say is the historical tradition. We've got tons of evidence from Irenaeus, and many of the early church fathers are quotations of the Gospels. They named the Gospels, and also the Gnostics' Gospels are naming the Gospels. So it's absolutely, totally anti-intellectual to be saying that the Gospels were anonymous. This is pumped out by modern academics today, who are not really objective in their scholarship. They have an axe to grind against Christianity. The very postmodernist in their thinking, and they're contradictory, they're dogmatic, that the Gospels are anonymous, yet they say there's no such thing as being dogmatic. So there's a contradiction there in the postmodern way of doing academia. They obviously have an axe to grind against Christianity. But Garcinol, I think his name is, and I've put a couple of articles in the next couple of days under this video, so you can look at the Gospels and their inscriptions and show you the evidence, the categorical evidence that these Gospels were not anonymous. People knew who wrote them. They knew who wrote them, okay? And they were popular amongst the early church. And the historical evidence, the quotations of the early church fathers alone demolishes Ijaz. It just absolutely don't demolish it. It demolishes him. If you notice, he doesn't even touch the historical information because he knows it will completely destroy his case. He just goes onto the finer points of textual criticism and the development of the title, because he knows that it's very technical and people find it very difficult to understand, so he can blind people with science. But he can't blind me with science, because I understand what he's saying, and I'm telling you, I'm reducing the scholarship into a very simple form so you can understand that he's telling you a load of fibs and that he doesn't really know what he's talking about. He's just latching on to modern scholars who are critical of Christianity. But if you do the historical research, if you do the analysis of all the text of the Gospels, you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, and you do a bird's eye view and an in-depth study of all these Gospels, you come to the conclusion that Martin Engel, a world authority in this issue, said that there's always been a titles to the Gospels. If it's only just John or Matthew or Mark, there's always been an indication on those texts who wrote them. Okay? So I've covered a lot of ground there. If those who are interested in the academic study, I'll put some articles down. Those who want a more popular one, the first article will be a popular article that will rebut Ijaz, and then you can have the more academic articles that goes into more intellectual depth that will certainly demolish this Muslim apologist who presents himself as some kind of scholar on the internet, but really he won't debate me. I've asked him to debate me. He said he'd debate me, then he says he's not well. I say, will you debate me? He says he's not well, and then he turns up and debates someone else, and then he says he's not well. So Ali Dawa says, I challenge you to debate this guy. I'll take the challenge, Ali Dawa. I'll debate him. He doesn't want to debate because he knows that I'll call him out on his shoddy scholarship, and it is shoddy. He's just pumping out a certain rhetoric without any real proper analysis and scrutiny. He won't allow me to scrutinize him intellectually on this issue, and he's scared of that intellectual scrutiny. So this is for you, Ijaz. Put up or shut up. Have a proper academic debate on the topic, or please stop pumping out this lies that you're pumping out to people. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.